Okay, are you comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
Need a drink or anything?
No.
Nope. Okay. I'm gonna make sure I can hear your microphone okay. Can you count to 10 for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right.
He wants to make sure you're in a good state of mind.
You passed that test.
Okay.
Now, Grandpa, it might be a little tricky to remember, but when I ask you a question, if you can repeat the question in your answer.
Oh, okay. I'll
So
try.
That means if I say, "What is your name?" you'll say, "My name is."
Okay.
Or if I say, "Where are we at today?" you'll say, "We are here."
Okay.
It's kind of tricky, but don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. But we're mainly just wanting to hear some of the stories and get them on video camera for all of us. You know what I mean?
Okay.
The first one, and these are coming from Jana. Well, first of all, go ahead and tell us who you are.
My name is James Huffmaster.
Perfect. And where are we sitting today?
We're sitting in the dining room of my home.
Okay. And what's the address here?
The address is 572 North and 3000 East Road, Sturtson, Illinois, 62463.
Perfect. All right. Why do people call you Huffy?
I have always been called that from the very beginning that I can remember. I will say this, when I was a junior in high school, my wife-to-be was the teacher, and she had a list of everyone's name on one class, and she called out the name and asked them to stand up so she could see everyone, who they were. And when she called my name, she said James Huffmaster, and there was 3 or 4 people that laughed, and she looked kind of funny. What's the matter? And anyway, one of those girls that laughed said, well, that's his name, but he's always been called Huffy, and that's all we know him as.
Okay. So, been a nickname forever. And it's also Uncle David and Uncle Aaron. Do people call them Huffy as well?
Yeah, some they do.
Some.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, when were you born?
I was born August the 30th, 1932,
Okay. And where at?
in Shelby County.
Shelby County. Excuse me, I'm gonna open a drink real quick. And what were your parents' names?
My parents were Vance and Matilda Huffmaster, Matilda Bolt Huffmaster.
Okay. So, you grew up, who were your brothers and sisters?
I had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and my oldest sister was Lorena, who was 17 years older than I was, and my second sister was Kathleen, who was 12 years older than I was, and my brother was Charles, who was 7 years older than I am.
So you were the baby.
Yes.
What did you do for a living?
Well, I started farming kind of young. I did buy a cow or 2, and the first calf I bought, I was 16 years old, and then raised it up to a cow, and then I bought a cow or 2, and we milked here. It was grade A milk, and started that way, and I did get to farm a little ground after I got out of high school, and then really 2 years after I was out of high school, I was very, very fortunate. There was a woman from Effingham who was a doctor's wife. She stopped at the filling station in Sturtson and wondered if anyone would want to farm their farm. And there was a man there. He said no, but anyway, he said, I know of a young man that's getting married, and he might be. And anyway, he told me about this farm. Is 100 acres for rent about 2 miles from where we live now. And Anyway, I and my father went to see that woman that afternoon, and she rented the land to me that day, which I was very, very fortunate because I was going to get married in just a couple of more months.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit. What type of school did you go to? In 1 second, I want to fix your overalls. They're bunched up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Do you need to take anything off the table?
Nope, I don't see any of the stuff on the table. So yeah, start with what was school like for you?
Okay, I went to a one-room schoolhouse for 4 years, but also that was in 1938 when I started, and kindergarten was never heard of, but my teacher at the one-room school there was 6 of us going to be in the first grade the next year, and she had us come 2 months the year before so we got used to school. So then after 4 years, I went into Sturgeon, which was a town school. But the country school was a one-room schoolhouse, and I think there was either 22 or 23 kids in the whole school.
And how did you get to school?
Walked. First 2 years I walked. My brother was in the 7th grade, so I walked with him to school. And then in the 3rd grade, he wasn't there, but my parents got a pony and had me ride it when I was in the 3rd grade. And so I did, but it wasn't a very good experience, really. The first day of school, it would not cross the railroad track, and I had to come back home, and my dad had to lead it across the railroad track. And one day, then it would cross the railroad after that. But one day going to school, a quarter of a mile from our house, someone had thrown out a tub of feathers right around the corner where I had to go, and a pony would not go by them. And it run back home. And my dad took me down there and let it by them feathers that was there. And then after that, why, it was fine, but it was all right. But a pony is a pony, really. They can be a little mischievous sometimes. It would walk to school, but it would gallop home.
That's interesting. Did your mom and dad farm?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you grew up, you knew how to farm.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then where did they farm at in Shelby County?
Well, they lived at 4 different places besides this place, which they bought in 1932. But they rented for, 4 different places and then lived there a while. There used to be a lot of people rented, and they'd move every March to a different place for some reason or another.
Gotcha. So would that be considered like sharecropping at that time?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Except one farm, they paid cash rent, where the farm I was born. They paid cash rent, but the woman that owned the farm, if she wanted to stay there, my folks had to keep her and feed her and wash her, do her washing and so forth. But part of the time she was there and part of the time she lived in Decatur.
Okay. I'm trying to make sure we stay in some sort of timeline here. So school, what was the next large, maybe significant chapter in your life after up to teenagers? So when you were 16, you went with your dad and knew of a lady who needed somebody to farm her?
No, when I was 18, I was out of school.
Okay, so you were out of school.
Right.
You started farming her ground. Then what's the next big milestone for your life
Well,
from that point? Is it grandma or was it something else?
yeah, really it was. I got married, really, this right before I started farming that 100 acres.
Okay, that's right.
But I'd farmed a little bit before that, and also I had done some milking. And there was a time or two I had worked for someone else for a little while, doing odd jobs and so forth.
Okay, so so then you had met grandma So start there. When did you meet Grandma?
When she came to Sturgeon to teach in 1948, and I was a junior in high school.
Okay, and what's Grandma's name?
Harriet Lucille Huffmaster, Stansfield.
Okay, and you met her in junior high, when you were in junior high.
Yes.
And how old was Grandma?
Well, she born 24, 20, let's see. She was born in 1924, and that had been 1948. We've been at 24 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was when you were a junior in high school.
Yeah, a junior. Uh-huh.
Okay. So I'll bring you back a little bit. How did you meet Lucille?
Well, she was my teacher a couple of years, and then I was out of school, and I never considered anything about her whatsoever. But one year out of high school, there was an organization come and asked me if I would take them on a hay rack ride and a wiener roast. And I said, yeah, I would. And so I went to town with my tractor and wagon, and pulled up to the schoolhouse, and here Lucille was the sponsor of this organization, which I think maybe was a glee club, but I'm not for sure. Anyway, I had put several bales of wheat straw on a wagon for the kids to sit on. Lucille sat on the very front, and kids sat on wheat straw, and we went a mile north of town and 3 miles east and another half a mile north, where a lot of people had wiener roast. It was well known for that, and there's a lot of poles cut displaying there. But the kid that lived on the farm right there, he had lit the fire earlier in the evening. Anyway, after we was there a little while, and the kids was having their wiener roast, and Lucille talked to me, and she said, oh, I am suffering from hay fever terribly. And she said, I don't know if I can stand to ride back to town or not. She said, I'm allergic to wheat. And she said the kids was throwing wheat straw out of the bales on the way out here, and I could hardly breathe. And so I said to her, well, you might ride on the tractor with me going back to town, to the school where it was. No, she said, no, I won't. But after a while, before we left, she said, oh, I think I will ride with you. So she got on the seat, and when we was ready to leave, and I got on behind her, which the tractor seat was very small, so that was kind of cozy, really, because I had to put my arms around her to steer and to use the throttle, which was a hand throttle, and I had to use the clutch and brakes with my legs around her. But we got back to town, everything, and anyway, she got off, and I did too, and the kids started too. And pretty soon, in just a minute or two, a kid come and said, Miss Stansfield, I've lost my billfold. And she said, well, his name was Wayne Worth. She said, I will take you out the way we went in my car and see if we can find it. And then so she said to me, will you stay here and watch that these kids all get gone all right? And I said, yeah. She left with that boy to look for the billfold. And right away after that, another boy come to me. And I could tell he was almost crying. And he said, oh, my dad's going to kill me. He just bought this car this week. And this is the first time I've ever driven it. And I drove it down here to school. And it's got 4 flat tires on it. And I said, well, I know the Ford dealer real well uptown, and when Lucille gets back, we'll go see if we can find him. He stays up late at night, I know that. Well, it wasn't very long till Lucille and Wayne come back, and they found his billfold in the middle of the road about 3 miles from school. And so then I told her what was going on, so she took me uptown to see if I could find Nate Bales, who was a Ford dealer. And we found him at a body shop. He was sitting at a desk in there. I went in and talked to him, told him what had happened. He said, take me down to the garage. It was a different building. and I will get a tank of air and 4 valve cores. That's what they'd done, unscrewed the valve cores and thrown them away. They hadn't hurt the tires. But, so he did that, and he went back to school in Lucille's car, and he put the valve cores in and filled each tire about half full, and his tank run out of air. And so he had that boy to drive it down to the garage real slow with nobody else in it, and got down there and he put air in them and so forth to where it should be. And then when he got in that, he said, well, take me back to the body shop. So Lucille and I did. And when we got back to the schoolhouse, I said to her, oh, it's getting kind of late. I hate to drive the tractor through town and wake everybody up. Would you take me home? And so she did. So that was actually the first that really we was together, but not very much. But it was a very nice, pleasant evening, and we got along fine. And then really that summer, the woman that run the restaurant in town for many, many years, she wanted a vacation, and Lucille and another woman who was the coach's wife, they decided to run the restaurant for 10 weeks that summer. And so they started in, and I would go in there, and because I was 18 then. And anyway, I said something to her about going to a show or something. Oh no, she said, I'm too old for you. And so then another time or two I asked her, and then finally she told the coach's wife and her husband that she said, oh, I'm too old to go with him. And the coach said, yes, Lucille, when you're 80, he'll be 72 and it won't make any difference. And so the next time I asked her, she said, there's only one way I'll go with you, and that's if I ask your father if I can, and Gib Brumerstead, who's president of the school board, even though I was out of school. And so she did, and that's when we started going together then.
So that first evening with the hayride, it seemed like all these things kept happening that just made you guys get to spend that much more time together.
Right.
So you think maybe God had a hand in that?
It very well could be. I will say this, she had started taking shots for her allergies, and really a few months after we was married, she got to quit, and she was done very well, except she didn't eat wheat bread. She always ate rye bread. But, and she went to the same church that I did and so forth, and we just, I don't know, it just seemed like things worked out very well.
Now, Grandma, where did she grow up?
She grew up in Lawrenceville, Illinois, and went to high school grade school and high school, and then she went to Eastern in 1942 to Teachers College. And she told me the only reason she went, she said, I really didn't want to be a teacher, but she said there was our class, there was 130 some in her class that graduated, and Eastern gave one scholarship to all the towns around, and anyway, she said there were 17 kids ahead of me in school, but almost all the boys went into the Army right after getting out of high school in 1942. And she said there were several girls that did not want to go to college that would have been eligible. So I was the one that got the scholarship, and so I went to Eastern, and she said I liked it pretty well. But also, she said, one night at Eastern, there was a bus, took a lot of us from college and went to Champaign to where a big band and choral groups sang and played. And she said, oh, coming home, I thought, oh, I would like to do that. And she told me that also when she graduated her baccalaureate from college, she sang a solo at their baccalaureate standing in the middle of the gymnasium without a microphone. And she said, I took some music lessons while I was going to Eastern as far as that goes. And she liked to sing, and she did sing a lot at a lot of weddings, and then later on a lot of funerals.
So to back up to how you guys met, when did you get married?
1952 in May, and I'd graduated in 1950 in May.
Okay, so 2 years after you graduated high school, you got married.
Yeah.
Then what happened next?
Well, we was married 6 months and lived in town, and I was drafted into the Army. And so Lucille lived in town while I was in the Army, and I was in almost 2 years, like in 1 month, I think. And then right after I got out of the Army, why, my folks, they were old, and they was ready to move to town. And so they did, and so Lucille and I moved here. And so I come here when I was about 5 months old. My parents bought this place. And so I've lived here all my life, which is 85 and a half years, except for 2.5 years when I was in the Army and first got married. Lived at the same place.
Okay. And so you were drafted.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I was drafted, and I went to the Army, and we had no colored people around here. And when the very first night when they had got up to Michigan, we was making our beds up, and they was too high, the beds, and the one at the bottom was a colored boy. And I spoke to him, and he looked at me and he said, "I've never talked to a white man." I said, "What?" He said, "I've never talked to a white man." He said, "I grew up in East Alton, Illinois," and he said, "If I met a white person on the street, I had to get off in the road and let them go by on the street." And so I talked to him there, and a little later then I was taking basic training, and we was almost half black and half white. And there was the first time we ever got a pass, why, it was for 250 miles from Fort Belvoir, Virginia, so I couldn't come home. But most of them that lived closer, why, they was after Saturday afternoon, man, they was getting ready to go to town into Washington, get on a bus and go home wherever they was at. And this one colored boy, which I knew fairly well, and he was a very hard worker, and we did a lot of work in the engineers, building bridges and roads and things. And anyway, he wasn't getting ready, and I said to him, "How come you're not going home?" Because he lived in West Virginia. And he said, "Well, I'm afraid I would never get back." He said, "I can't read or write, and I'm afraid I'd get lost and wouldn't get back." And then he told me, I said, "Did you ever go to school?" He said, "I went 2 days." And he said, "The second day there was 3 white boys followed me part way home, and they told me if I ever come back they'd kill me." And he said, "I was never out of the county that I grew up in, and the only thing I ever did was drive mules and cut wood, and make posts and cut wood to burn." But he was a very, very nice gentleman, that's for sure.
So when you were drafted, where did you have to go? From Stewartson to where?
I went to St. Louis and then to Michigan and got clothes and stuff up there, and then went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
And how long were you in Virginia before you had to go to Korea?
6 months. I was there longer than most people because I went to our basic training, which was 8 weeks, and then I took engineer training, which was 8 weeks, and then I went to leadership school, which was 8 weeks. So I was there 24 weeks, and then come home on leave, and then went to Korea.
How did you get to Korea?
I got to Korea by flying on a plane from Chicago to Los Angeles, and then I went to Oakland, California, and went to, I think it was called Camp Stoneman, and I was there just a little while, and I know 2 or 3 other guys that had been in basic training. They was there, and but they left and I didn't, and I didn't. And come to find out they'd lost my medical records to tell whether I'd had shots or not. And so, but then it wasn't too long why it come. And so then I went on ship and I went underneath the Golden Gate Bridge going to Korea. And I think it was either 11 or 12 days that we went to Korea, and we was almost there. We'd been issued rifles in California, almost there, and the truce was signed. And no more weapons could be brought into Korea. So we had to turn around and go back to Japan and turn our rifles in. And then I went to I went to school there for just a week or 10 days. CBR school, chemical, biological, and radiological school. And we went on that was at Sasebo in Japan. It was an island off the southern tip. And then I went to Korea after that. So I was never in no fighting, but I will say this, I really done some of the hardest work in my life in the Army. We built enormous bridges, did a lot of work on roads. We built some airplane hangars. We mixed a lot of cement by hand in the airplane hangar and for bridge abutments and so forth. And so I actually, if I hadn't been married, I could have enjoyed the Army very well. Because I did make sergeant before I come home.
Where in Korea were you?
Well, I was a couple of places, but really not over 100 miles from Seoul. But then at the very last place, I was at Panmunjom, and that was, we built a prison for the Chinese prisoners that would not go back to North Korea when the truce was signed. And we built a prison there for 3,000 soldiers, and they come back into the prison before we was done quite. And say 3 or 4 days we was with them, and most of them was very young kids, looked like 16, 17, 18 years old. All they had was t-shirts, shorts, and tennis shoes. That's the only thing they had when they was brought there.
So while you were in Korea, what year exactly was that?
Well, last half of 1953, and then all of 54 except, come home in last of October, 1st November.
So in 1953 and in 1954, you're in Korea.
Right.
What's Lucille doing?
She taught school then until February of 54. Jan Lynn was born in February of 54, and she didn't teach school after she was born, except she did substitute, and 2 different times she taught a full semester, once at Sturts and Strasbourg and once at Neoga, while they was waiting on a teacher to graduate that they had hired.
So you'd had your first child.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And was that something you guys had planned on when you got married? You knew you wanted to have kids?
Well,
right away?
yeah, well, I think so. There comes somebody in there.
It's Uncle David.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we won't put you on camera.
Okay.
Not yet. Yes. Okay, so Janelyn was born
Yeah.
in 1954.
4. Mm-hmm.
When did you come back home from Korea?
In November, 1st of November of 54.
Okay, so how many months was
Well,
that?
she was
before
about
you-
9 months old.
So that was the first time you got to see her?
Right.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And how
Red Cross notified me when she was born in February. Why they notified me within 2 or 3 days of when she was born. And
okay.
I knew she was a girl.
Do you want to walk in and sit down or anything?
No, I just stopped in.
You can walk by if you want. It's no
No.
big deal. We're getting all the stories on film here. So, okay, Mom was born. You met her when she was 9 months old. So what did you do when you got back from Korea?
I moved here within 2 weeks, and my parents moved into town, and we had cows here. My dad did, and I did too some. And so I milked the cows and started farming here and a couple other places that he had rented, but my father farmed for about 3 years.
Okay, 1 second. Say that again. My camera stopped. So 1954, when you came back, you were milking cows and started to farm.
Yes. Mhm.
So go ahead and say that again.
Well, I come home at the first of November in '54 and come to Sturgeon, and in 10 days we moved out to the farm in the country where my parents lived, and we had cows that we milked and then land that also I farmed. I was very fortunate that my parents was old and wanted to, you know, semi-retire anyway, and my brother did not care to farm, and of course the sisters, they were both gone.
How many acres at that time do you think you had? Did you own, and then how many did you?
I own nothing. Zero.
And
But
and how many acres were you renting then?
192.
Okay.
It was 72 here, and that 100 acres that I talked about that rented from that woman, and 20 more acres over here on another road.
Okay. So, what's the next milestone then? So, Jana was born, then you're farming, you're milking cows.
Mm-hmm.
Was grandma?
Well-
Grandma was staying home,
Yeah,
watching Jana.
Yeah.
So, what's the next?
well, in 1958, David was born.
Okay.
In 1959, Aaron was born. And in 1960, Lucille had a miscarriage. But anyway, in 1958 was a big year. Lucille and I bought this 72 acres from my parents with $1,000 down, and then paid $1,000 a year on it till it was paid for, but plus interest, because we bought it on contract. So, but also I had to buy my dad's machinery, and I'd pay $1,000 down on it a year until I got it paid for.
So 1958, how much was an acre?
Well, it was very cheap here. I had built a milk house here, and my dad took that off of the price. And anyway, it come out $237 an acre, which was very, very reasonable as far as that goes. But there was a lot of land that didn't sell for very much more than that then.
How much is an acre now? Do you reckon?
How,
9 to 10.
You can speak up. That's fine.
9 to 10,000.
Okay. So it was a good investment.
Well, yeah. Then we bought land 3 times after that.
Okay. So 1958, the boys are born.
One of them.
One of them.
Yeah.
59, Aaron was born.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, let's see.
Just raising kids and farming.
Yeah, I got to milking a few more cows than we had been all the time. So milk check, when we first come, I had to pay my parents $200 for the chickens that they had, and also $200 they had bought a new rug in the front room at that time, just a month or two ahead. And so I'd pay them $400 for the chickens and the rug. But we was very fortunate. We didn't have to pay any house rent. It was just went in with farming the ground and so forth.
Okay.
But then, we was very, very fortunate, and we didn't have many medical bills or anything like that to speak of. And let's see, 1963, let's see, yeah, I believe that's right. David, would that have been when I bought the first self-propelled combine in '63?
Awful close.
I think it was.
No cab.
Yeah, no cab. But, and so I did a little custom work for some people then too, and you got paid by the acre what you did in shelling corn and cutting beans.
Okay. I'm looking at some things.
And, okay. Also during that time, my wife started the managing the choir at our church, And she did that for approximately 35 years with a choir leader, and she did very, very well. I will tell you about one Sunday, and it was in the early 60s. I don't know when it was, but it was in the early 60s. Easter Sunday morning, church started, and we took up the offering, and they baptized 2 or 3 kids also. And then the preacher said that we're having a special by Lucille this morning. And so she sang a song, and when it was over, the minister said, "That was better than any sermon I could give you, so I'm going to dismiss you, and you go home with your family and friends." Which, you know, I thought pretty nice, really.
I've got to tell him one thing, and
Sure.
I'm going home.
Okay.
Jean Schumark passed away.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
Did you say how old she was?
no,
Oh, okay.
mid-90s.
Okay.
She passed away, so she'd been bad for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I knew that she had been. She'd broke a hip, hadn't she?
Yeah, so anyway, I thought you'd want to know.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Okay, well, good to see you.
See ya.
We'll see you later.
Okay.
I've got a few things that Mom wants to ask.
Okay. Oh, I would like,
More about the boat ride over to Korea and then.
what?
And Grandpa, can you move the phone over, because when you're playing with it, I can hear it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And also make sure you don't touch the microphone on your chest.
Okay.
But you're doing pretty good other than
Lots
that.
of rules.
Well, just a few fun things real quick. Mom wants to know, when did you have your first Dairy Queen Sunday?
Oh, on our honeymoon. I don't know if it was the first, but that's about the time they started having Dairy Queen stands. And anyway, I remember telling Lucille, well, on our honeymoon, every time we go by a Dairy Queen stand, we're going to stop and get one.
And when was that? What year?
That was 1952.
Okay. Another one I remember you talking about. Did you play basketball?
Yeah.
And I remember
Baseball.
baseball. I remember you saying one trip that you went to it was the first time you went to a J.C. Penney's, and I believe you bought a suit. Does that sound right?
No, it don't.
The first time you ever went to a J.C. Penney's was had something to do with a trip for basketball or baseball?
Well, I bought it was called a sports sweater in 1946 when I was a freshman in a store in Mattoon. And I got a large letter that year in baseball and basketball, and my mother sewed that on each side of my sweater. And the sweater was black, which our colors was black and orange, and the letters was orange.
Okay.
But-
I don't know what I was thinking. Oh,
Oh, yeah.
maybe it was the first Steak and Shake. One of the first times you went to Steak and Shake.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was state tournament, Illinois state tournament at Champaign. And I fortunate enough to go up there either 2 or 3 years to the tournament. Back then, they used to give 5 tickets to each high school for them to go. And then all of us players, we would go maybe 5 one day and then 5 more the next day. And but that was the first Steak and Shake I'd ever saw, was up at and where I ate at was up at Champaign.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one I remember.
Okay.
Then Mom also says, and make sure you don't play with that phone too much.
Oh gosh, I can.
Mom wants to know, what is your favorite animal?
Well, I like Holstein cows as far as that goes, and I enjoyed milking. Really, I started milking my first cow when I was 5 years old, and Charles was not good at milking, but he carried the milk to the milk house and put it in the strainer and strained it and put it in cans. But I milked, and when I was 9 years old is when we got electricity. But up at that time, I was milking 3 cows night and morning. And my dad milked and my mother milked, and Charles carried the milk. And then we got electricity, and it wasn't very long till we got a milking machine. But I always liked Holstein cows very well, and I got along well with them. I think as a general rule, they like me too.
Then she asked, what was your least favorite animal?
Least favorite? Well, really, I never had hardly anything to do with hogs. David raised some hogs for a few years, and Aaron did too, but I never did raise hogs, I don't think. Maybe 1 year after I quit milking, but that's it.
Any particular reason why?
No, not really. See, years ago, we used to butcher ourselves every winter hogs and one steer to have meat, and you cured that meat. Morton's curing salt, and I can remember Dad rubbing that on hams and different things, bacon and so on.
She also asks, if you had not been a farmer, what would you have wanted to be?
Well, really, when I was in grade school, I really thought I'd like to be a teacher. I really did, but then I didn't go to college or anything, and so then after I started, in farming, as I said, I bought my first calf, I know, when I was 16, I think for $22, if I remember right.
Okay.
But
She asked, do you remember your baptism and how old were you?
no, I was a baby, so I don't remember.
Okay.
But what I will tell you is that when I was a freshman in high school, you got initiated, the freshmen got initiated by upperclassmen. One night was called initiation, and my initiation was I had to kiss every girl in the class, and I'd probably never kissed nobody before. And also there was a teacher there that I had to kneel down and propose to her. Mary McClory, that was her name.
I've never heard that. So that's funny.
But different people had to do different things. Some of them had to sing songs, and some of them give readings, and different things like that. I don't know. There was, we had the ones that graduated in my class was 25, 18 girls and 7 boys. But there was 2 boys that went into service between our junior and senior year. And there was a couple other boys that had quit before they ever graduated.
She asks, did you ever want to go to New York City?
Not really. Not really.
I don't know why she asks some of these, but she wants to know, what was your favorite meal that Grandma used to make?
Well, I did not like a lot of meat when I didn't eat very much when I was young, but I did like white meat on chicken, and really, I don't remember that we had hamburgers very often until like after I was way up in high school, and I don't think I ever ate French fries until I was in high school. And I don't think they had French fries in Sturgeon. That was a time or two in Effingham that I had them.
Do you remember what Grandma used to make? Like, my favorite thing she made was her spaghetti.
Well, yeah, but I would say her potato salad was the best I ever ate. And I remember a cousin that we ate with them a lot of times at their house, and they'd eat here. And he always said Lucille made the best potato salad of anyone he'd ever eaten.
And noodles.
Huh?
Noodles and cinnamon rolls.
Well, my mother Lucille made good cinnamon rolls. My mother made the noodles mainly most of the time. She was well known for her noodles. Did you know that Aaron makes lots of noodles now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, my daughter Vivian really likes them at his house. Okay, I'm gonna see here. So the boys were born in
58 and 59.
59. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what was next after they were born and you and Grandma were raising kids and farming? Was that pretty much it for the next
Yeah,
years?
but she did a lot of work in church as far as that goes. I said about the singing part, but also for a long time she was head of the Women's Society, and then back first, I don't remember we used to ever serve meals after a death, but then later on they did, and she pretty near always was in charge of that. Her and another woman, but the other woman worked in the bank, and so a lot of times at noon she couldn't be there, but she did help Lucille with a lot of things.
Okay. She also used to tutor, didn't she?
She did some, yeah. She tutored, well, 1, 2, 3 different kids that I know of that I remember that she went to their houses. 1, 2, 3. And I know one of them's dead now, that's for sure. Well, died when probably still in high school. But he taught her typing, I think, at home.
Okay.
But
one story we all enjoy is how long did you and Grandma date before you got married? Was it?
well, it'd been approximately a year.
And on one of those dates, can you describe what it was like when you guys were dating? As far as what did you like to do?
Well, usually we went to a movie, either in Effingham or Mattoon. And right at the very end, before we got married, Mattoon did have a outdoor theater. I remember that, and we went there a time or two. And I remember once when Phil and Betty Jo went with us over there. But usually that's what we did. And we used to, in high school, take parties skating at skating rinks in Mattoon, and had 1 or 2 every year up there. And then usually we'd go to a movie after the skating was over.
Okay. There's one story about you guys dancing in the road.
Then what? Oh, one night, I think it was a month or 2 before we was married, we'd been to Effingham to a movie, and coming home south of Sturgeon on Route 32, there was music come on the radio, and Lucille said, "Oh, that would be good music to dance to." And so I stopped the car right on the highway. There was no car coming or going. We got out and we danced in front of the car there until that song was over on the radio. And there was never a car come or nothing. And nowadays, why, that'd be impossible to do.
What is some of your favorite music?
I like big band music, very much so.
Is there
And
an artist in particular?
well, not really. There's just a lot. There's a woman called Anita O'Day that she sings a song called "A Little Bit South of North Carolina," which I think is one of the prettiest songs I ever heard. But as I said, Lucille, she did sing a lot of solos at church too, as far as that goes.
And what church did you guys go to?
We went to Sturgeon Methodist Church. Sturgeon,
Okay.
yeah.
And about how big is that church?
Well, at that time, it was approximately 200.
Okay. And how big is Stewartson?
750.
Okay.
But the Lutheran Church is the largest one. And now Methodist Church is way, way down because most young people have moved away. And we have no kids at our church now. No kids. And we had lots and lots when I was young, like grade school, high school, and the first year or 2 afterwards. And our church would be pretty near full every Sunday. But now it's altogether different. But Lutheran Church has a big congregation because they also have a school, and they've got 120 some students in their school. And that draws in a lot of parents, and they come to the church.
Okay.
David's got 3 kids in Trinity School now.
I was going to say, so who was your first grandchild?
Let's see. Del Rey.
Correct.
Yeah.
When was she born?
She was born oh, well, I don't know.
81, 82?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
80. She was born the first year they was married, and I think that's 1980, isn't it?
is that right? So, how many grandkids do you have?
4 grandchildren and 5 great grandchildren.
Yep, that sounds right. Okay.
With one on the way.
With one on the way.
Yeah.
One coming this summer. Anything popping in your head that you'd like to talk about? I
Well,
know we've been talking a while.
in my life, and have been so many people have been very, very good to me. I've had relation that's been good, and there's several. The local banker was good. There's times he loaned me money when I wanted to buy something that I was very fortunate that he did, and so forth.
I know there's probably a lot of them. What are some of the happiest times of your life that you can think of?
Well, coming home from Korea, naturally, when I come in the bus to Mattoon and Lucille come up there to get me, but there was another couple brought her because I got up there at 1 something in the morning, and that definitely was one of the most. And I was surprised when I got home that night. My mother was taking care of Jana Lynn, but when Lucille then my mother went home as soon as I got home, but Lucille turned the light on in the bedroom, and Jana Lynn stood up, holding on to the side of the baby bed, and smiled when I come in. Almost, and I never saw her or anything, but just almost unbelievable, because she wasn't very old or anything, but she always was very friendly with most people that she ever met, as far as that goes.
Describe your kids.
Well, let's see. Oh, Jana Lynn, when she was a good singer also in high school especially, and a while afterwards. But when she was in high school and she went to some music contest, and there was a man there that talked to her and wanted her to go on a school band and school chorus trip, and went clear to California that summer. But I think it cost $200 and some, but there was a whole busload of them that went. But I think she probably really enjoyed it, but I don't think she spent very much money on it because she's afraid she'd be broke before she got home. But she did enjoy singing in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. I do know that. But they played several places they sang at, even in California and so forth, but she always talks about the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
And then what is Uncle David like?
Well, let's see. I don't know how to describe him. I'm kind of proud of him as far as that way. He gets quite a bit of work done. He is a little faster than what Aaron is, but Aaron can do things that David can't do. They kind of complement one another. Now, Aaron does all the planting, but David gets the ground ready, and but both of them do the harvesting, but Aaron does the most. But I don't know, they're completely different, because Aaron is short and David is normal height, I'd say, 5'11", I think. And Aaron's not that tall, but Aaron reminds me of Lucille's dad very much. He could fix anything. He could fix clocks, and he had 3 clocks when he died he was working on. But also he could fix things on cars, and he was also a good electrician, and I was just amazed at how many things he could do. And Aaron is kind of that same way.
So were you proud that your sons wanted to farm?
Oh yeah, very definitely. I don't think that they ever thought too much about anything. Now David was a real good baseball player, and he did very well in high school. But then and he was a good basketball player also. Aaron, now he was a manager when he was in high school. He started playing, but he was very short, and so it wasn't too long till he became manager. But now Aaron knows a lot of things to do around with medical things as far as that goes, doctors and hospitals and so forth.
Can you talk about his accident and what that was like for you?
Okay, and that was in 1984, approximately 6 months after he was married, and we had finished harvesting, and he was helping another man harvest who lived a couple of miles from here, and he was unloading beans for him one morning. They'd been cut 2 or 3 days before, and then they had some moisture in them, and they'd froze in the wagon some. And anyway, he was unloading them, and pretty soon the beans quit running. And anyway, he got a jack. It was a gravity wagon, so one side's low where they better run out on. He went around to the other side of the wagon with a hydraulic jack. He was going to jack it up some so it was higher, and thought it would make him come out easier. And as he squatted down, the wagon come clear out of the running gears and fell on him, and that's when it broke his back. And but anyway, he hollered, and David heard him because it was close to town, just a quarter of a mile away, and David was at the filling station, and they heard him, and then they saw what happened, and they called the ambulance, and then he went. And anyway, that first day down at Effingham, that's where they took him, and the doctor told us, he said, after he x-rayed it, I've never saw anything like this. I don't know what to do. I'm going to send him to Springfield, which they put him on a helicopter and took him to Springfield. And Lucille and I, and then Rose come too. She was at work and that day, but she come up there to Springfield. And after we was there a couple hours, the doctor come and talked to Lucille and Rose and me, and he said, I've never saw a back broke like this one before. I don't know what to do. He said, I know I can't operate, because if I do, he will never walk again, because it's nothing but a bundle of nerves where it's broke. And he said, there's no way to operate without cutting the nerves and paralyze him. And so then we stayed up there at the hospital that night, but that didn't sound, too good. But early the next morning, that doctor come and talked to us in the waiting room where we sat, and he said, well, I've done some calling last night, and I found a couple of places that had something similar to Aaron's. And he said they put him in a full body cast. What they did, they pulled him apart, but get that back in place if they could. And so they put pins in Aaron's head and pins in his knees, and then they had ropes and pulleys and weights. I think they had 60 pounds on 30 pounds on each weight, I think is the way they started. But anyway, he said, I had thought about doing that and then put him in a full body cast, and they said that's what I shouldn't do. That they did that and it slipped. The thing to do is, if you get it back in place, just let him lay on bed without moving until it starts to grow back. And he said Aaron does have a pretty good chance because he's young. And so he laid 30 or 31 days on that bed without ever moving. The only thing was, when I first saw Aaron up there, his head was over as far as it could go on one side. And he complained about his side hurting. And anyway, that doctor then, the next morning he started that, put the pins in and started pulling. And really, it was about 6 or 7 hours, he thought he had it back where it belonged. And so then he took some of the weight off, but he left it on half of it. And that's the way he laid. But he kept complaining about his right side, and you could see there was a great big swelled spot here. Well, I will tell you this, the first night the doctor said, I think he'll live, but I don't know if his kidneys will work, I don't know if his bowels will work, and I don't know if he'll ever walk again. But anyway, then he kept, after he'd been pulled apart, he kept complaining about this back hurting so bad. And so the doctor had, I think he put 4 nurses on each side of Aaron, and then 2 other nurses. And they had him lift the weights a little bit, but he said, I want to lift him up just a little bit and take that sheet out that he was brought up here on. And when they pulled it out, the soybeans just rolled. And Aaron's, of course, he said he was awake, and he said, one colored nurse said, what are those things? And then said soybeans, and he said, oh, it felt so much better. And then that place did actually go down, but it was, oh, I bet this big around, and I bet it stood out an inch or an inch and a half. But after then 30-some days, why, wasn't too awful long till the doctor, and he put him in a full body cast in, and he said, well, I think he could go to Effingham Hospital now, and for 2 or 3 months going to be. And anyway, we did, and I do remember this, the man that runs a funeral parlor, and also he sold feed there in town. He run the ambulance, and he come up and got Aaron, and when he come back from Springfield going to Effingham, he stopped at my mother's house and went in and got her, and she was 90 years old, to come out and see Aaron, and she saw him then on his way to Effingham. And then he did better, or did fine down there, but he laid flat all the time. He didn't walk or nothing like that. And but they did do something to his legs. They would have him move them. I do know that some. But then I don't know how long he was down there. As I said, he was in the hospital 128 days altogether. But also, when the doctor said we're sending him, or he said, I want him to come back up here to Springfield and we'll stand him up. But he said, that may take 3 or 4 days as long as he's been flat. He said some people, they have terrible time standing up straight. And so, but Aaron did the second day, he stood up, and he just did fine, and it wasn't too awful long then until he got to come home. But I remember that doctor, the day I brought him home, he said, well, Aaron, you've done very well, and I'm going to write something in the, some medicine book. Is it Boston or Massachusetts School of Medicine or something where they write in, doctors, going to write about you in it. And he said, Aaron, you've done fine, but he said, I'm sure you will be in a wheelchair by the time you're 50. And now he's needing this operation now again because something's not quite right.
But he's been somewhat fine, other than pain. He can walk and work and everything.
But he's been taking now epidural shots. He's had 3, I think, just recently now. But he said next year he'll probably be operated on. But they did say something about they could do different now than they did then, because what is it that they can see nerves with? Do you know?
MRI or
No.
CAT scan?
No, not that. I don't know. It's got a name. But he said this doctor now has told him, with this, I can see exactly where your nerves are at and push them out of the way rather than cut them or anything. Yeah. And if I heard the word, I would know it, but I can't think of it right now.
Okay.
But,
something I was thinking about. Are there can you think of any other significant moments in your life? I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch, but you think about Korea, grandma, kids, anything that pops out. Well, now this house,
Yeah,
you guys built this, correct?
1967 we built this house. We had, I think it was, well, I'd had a 20-year endowment policy, and Lucille had two, and they both come due in 1967. That was $3,000. Mine was two, and hers was one, so that made $3,000. And we had about $4,000 in when, so we had $7,000, and the man had told me he had drew this up, and he said I would say 18 to 19,000. So we did that. Well, ended up about 21,000, but we had that like 7,000, and I paid $100 a month on that, and then at the end of the year I paid the interest up. Is the way we did, and I was very, very fortunate. I had a 10-year loan on it, and I think we got paid for in 9 years. But we was very fortunate, really.
What made you decide to build the new house? Now you built this house directly where the old house was.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
can you
and
describe that?
Well, the old house had a basement under it. See, we had built that in 1947, and year we got a bathroom in the house. And well, our house was small, and the boys was sleeping on the west porch, actually. I don't know if you can ever remember. You can't remember that, can you? But there was a west porch on it. Did you ever see the picture of the house in there?
Yeah.
The old house? Well, they slept in a double bunk bed out there on that porch, and we really needed more room. Jan had one room for bedroom, and Lucille and I had another, and then we had the bathroom, and we didn't have no dining room, but we had a kitchen and a living room, and that was it. And so and it was old. I mean, it had been built a long time ago, as far as that goes. And so we tore the house down, and we lived in the garage while the new house was built.
Gotcha. Was farming easy for you?
Yeah, I enjoyed farming. I really did.
Can you describe a season in particular that just you felt like you guys were blessed? I'm sure there were
lots of them. But I tell you one thing, 1 or 2 years before I got to be 16 years old or something, I shucked some corn by hand until Dad got a corn picker. And now that was work, I will say. I could just shuck one row to his 2 rows at a time. That's what most people shucked. I had a cousin who won the Shelby County corn shucking contest 2 years in a row. And I talked to him here several years ago before he died, and he said, I worked for a hired man for a man up around Windsor, and he said, I shucked 162 bushel of corn one day over scales and unloaded it. And he said, that's the most I ever did in my life. But used to, if a person could shuck 100 bushel, they considered very good. But Lucille's uncle down at Lawrenceville, he said before the First World War, a couple of years, him and a couple of other men down there went to Hammond, Illinois, and he said, shuck corn. And he said, oh, we couldn't believe the corn up there, and according to what we had, he said our corn was poor and down at Lawrenceville and maybe 30 or 35 bushel the acre, and said right away there was 100 bushel corn up there. And he said, oh, it was altogether different shucking. And but then in later years, I can remember when starter fertilizer come along, made a big difference, and nitrogen made a bigger difference when it did in yields. But it used to be sometimes if you could put a field in clover and plow it under, it would do much better because there was nitrogen in clover. And same way with alfalfa. But around here the ground was too poor to raise alfalfa, except in the bottom they could. But now they can, after it's limed and fertilized and so forth.
Did you always plant corn and soybeans, or you did
wheat and oats also? we used to thrash. And I did 1 year, the last year we thrashed, I had an uncle come with horses and his hay rack before anybody else did, and I got up from the breakfast table and got a pitchfork and rode out to the field with him, and I throwed him bundles and he loaded them onto the wagon, and that was one time that I loaded 1 load of bundles in my life, and then because that was before combine, see. You did thrash machine, a man come with a thrash machine, and there's usually when you thrash to be 10, 12, 15 people at least, because you had to haul it in from the field, put it in the thrash machine, and then made a big straw stack out of that straw, and then there'd be a couple, 3, 4 men, they would run that in box wagons of grain, and then they have to unload it in a bin, you know. So it took a lot of work to thrash, but that was, and I always there was what called rings, and there'd be like these 10 or 12 farms in one ring, and when they'd be done, they always had an ice cream supper afterwards.
Now, whenever, let's say around the 90s, when all the grandkids, we would spend summers here, correct, with Grandma. What do you remember about those times in the 80s and 90s? Because kids would get dropped off here, right?
Well, yeah.
And do you remember playing baseball in the backyard?
Well, a little bit, yeah, I do some.
In the rope swing?
Yeah.
And
we had a big porch swing too, didn't we, in the tree out here? Did you come to the Stansfield reunion that Lucille had? Mm-hmm. Huh? Okay. I think that was 1979 or 1980, one or the other. I don't know which it was, but one or the other was.
Well, there was one when we were kids out back here.
Well, that's what I mean. That was a
It would have been later then, because I remember.
it probably would have been in the 90s.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I thought this was the first year I built the machine shed that we had the first Huffmaster reunion. Now, like Uncle Phil and Bob's and Hank's, they come, and also Lucille's cousin from Milwaukee, and the one from Washington State, and the one from lived down by St. Louis, Parrot.
Yeah, everybody was here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, but I will say this. I think you may not like this, but I think Lucille, Audrey stayed here more than anyone else, and she got off the school bus here for several years, and would stay until her mom got off work, you know, and would come and get her. But there was a time when Lucille was fairly heavy, and her and Audrey started walking almost every evening, and they would a lot of times walk down to the corner here, which was a little over half a mile, and then walk back. And Lucille started losing weight from walking. I do remember that. So I think, and also when she was in the nursing home, you know, Audrey worked at Lakeland College, and when she come home, it'd come right by the nursing home, and she did stop and see Lucille a lot. I do know that. Because it was handy and convenient for her too, but she did. I just think she probably was a little closer to Lucille than most of you.
Well, Audrey used to clean too, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Which one was the biggest troublemaker out of the 4?
Oh, I didn't know that any of them was troublemakers, really.
Everybody was okay?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, whenever...
I will remember, though, when... Susan, did you stay here for like 3 months here and down, and your mother up at... Dad up at Lincoln?
They're in Texas.
Huh?
They were in Texas.
Yeah, Mike and Jana, but his folks,
yes.
You stayed up there too. When Jana had, 4 or 5 months when she was in bed all the time?
Yeah.
I remember that. Didn't Aaron and Rose take you? And now he had just got out of the hospital a little while before he took you down to Texas. I do remember that.
Yep.
About how many acres were you guys farming probably in the 90s when us kids were here all the time? But that time, what I remember the most is large family lunches,
Yeah,
Sunday dinners,
yeah.
you and Uncle David and Uncle Aaron farming, Grandma babysitting all us kids,
Okay.
and then Jana was working in Sullivan for the artist.
Oh,
Janet.
yeah, yeah.
So there was 4 or 5 years there of summers when we were always here.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of what was day to day like for you, because for us it was everybody came in for lunch,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and then we played all over the place,
Yeah.
the cousins. So about how many acres were you farming?
Well, I'm trying to think. Be 70, 130, 180, and 260, 280, about 310.
Okay. And then Grandma was stay at home, but I think she was tutoring some.
Yeah,
And
once.
then she was choir
Yeah,
director.
yeah.
What all was Grandma doing, do you think, in the 90s?
Well,
All
she did not do any tutoring or any substitute teaching in the 90s, because after I got on the school board, why she didn't do that anymore, because they used to, a lot of times they would talk about people that got on the school board and then their wives would be substitute teachers and so forth. So she never taught after that. And I think I got on the school board in 76 or 77. I was on, I think, 11 years, I believe.
Okay. I remember her driving us to Candy's Kitchen too. Do you remember Candy's Kitchen
Yeah, but where was it at?
in Stewartson? Correct, Sue?
The restaurant in Sturtson.
Okay, Candy's Kitchen, I can, okay, I don't know.
And
There.
then, what else? I think that may be good for today. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that pops out in your head.
Well, let's see. I'll tell you this. The night that Lucille had the miscarriage, I expect it was about 7 o'clock or so. She said, "Oh, I'm bleeding." So I called the doctor in town, and he asked me a few questions and told me a few things, and then he said, "But if it doesn't stop and it gets worse, call me back." Well, in another hour or two, she said, "Oh, it's getting worse." So I called him, and he said, "I'll be right out." And he come out, and right after he saw her and got here, he asked where our telephone was at, and he called Gib Brumerstead, who run the ambulance and was a funeral director. He come out and he said, "Hurry." And anyway, we loaded her up in the ambulance. He come pretty quick, and the doctor said, "I'm going to follow you down to the hospital, Gib." And he did, and of course I had Jan Lynn, David, and Aaron, and they was just, 2 and 1, David and Aaron, and Jan Lynn was about 5 or 6. Anyway, but later on then Lucille told me, she said, "I remember going down there, and then as soon as we got down there, why, they took me out of the ambulance, and Doc took a hold of my hand, and he said, 'Hold on, Lucille, hold on.' And she said, 'I remember us going in the door and then elevator up to the operating room, but I remember getting on the elevator and saying, Doc said, "Hold on, Lucille, just a little bit longer." And then she said, I passed out, and I don't remember nothing after that, but she said, "Huffy, I had the most wonderful feeling I've ever had in my life." then. And then after we got up to the upstairs, and then they, you know, she got along all right, but she just said it was just like something out of this world. And so what I was going to tell you, this is a little different. Last Monday, the day after Easter, in the Mattoon paper, there was a recipe for a peanut butter custard pie. And I've made custard pies, but I never made a peanut butter pie. And I read the recipe that this Amish woman put in. About every week she has some recipe from Arthur. And it said to separate the egg whites from the yolks. And I've never done that. And I didn't know for sure how to do it, so I called this woman that I know. She lives up close to Strasburg, and she had the same aunt and uncle that I did. It was her mother's brother that married my mother's sister. And anyway, so we know she's 2 years younger than I am, but we've known her all our lives. And once in a while I talk to her. So I thought, well, Rose and Del Rey, neither one of them, or not Del Rey, but Doris, they wasn't home. So I called her and I said, how do you separate egg yolks from the whites? And so she told me what to do. And so anyway, I said, well, I may try and make it pretty soon. But I didn't that day, but I did the next. But anyway, she said, oh, I'm glad you called. The day before was Easter. She said, did you go to sunrise service? And I said, yeah, I did. And she said, well, I did too. And she goes to St. Paul's at Lutheran Church at Strasburg. And she said, Huffy, when I left home, I drove down to the corner, and then I turned east to go into Strasburg, which she just lives a mile out. And she said, oh, the sun was just coming up. And she said, I have watched the sun come out in my kitchen a lot of times of the morning, but I never ever saw anything like this. It was just like it was out of this world, the most beautiful thing I ever saw. And she said, I just couldn't get over it. And she said, all of a sudden, it was just like God said to me, this sun is to remind you of my son who died for you on the cross. And she said, and then I was in the church, but she said, oh, I had the most wonderful feeling, I can't describe it, when I was going to town. Did I ever tell you about my mother's sister that died young? There was 8 kids in the family, no, 9. But anyway, there was this girl that was 1 year younger than Mother. I think her name was Emily. But Mother said we knew something was the matter with her because she couldn't run and play like the rest of us kids could. But said she could talk and she could walk and so forth. But she said, I imagine there was something the matter with her heart, but I don't know because we didn't go to the doctor then, way back in the 1800s. And anyway, she said, Grandpa, every morning at breakfast, he would read us a few verses of scripture, and then said after breakfast, Grandma would set this girl on a stool and comb and brush her hair. And she said this one morning, she was combing and brushing her hair when this girl said, do you hear that singing? And Grandma said, what? Don't you hear those angels singing? And Grandma said no, and she died right then.
I think I have heard that.
Okay.
Last one for now, for today. Can you talk about Grandma's dad and the economic situation in Lawrenceville and how he was trying to build his house?
Oh, yes. Lucille's father built a house right after he got out of the First World War, a little while, 1921, I think. And I don't know what year he got married, but it was close to that, maybe a little before. I think a year or two before. But he built this house, a one-story house with a basement. And anyway, within 5 or 6 years, he had 4 children and his father-in-law come to stay with him the day his mother-in-law died. And he lived there until Lucille was 17. She said he died on the day she graduated from high school. But anyway, said they was doing all right, but they just plain did not have near enough space. And he knew this man that was a carpenter, and he talked to him and he said, could you lift my roof up and build me 4 rooms and a bathroom on the second up floor, you know, to make it. And said, this man said, yeah, he had 2 or 3 boys that helped him. Yeah, he could do that. Well, anyway, he got the roof raised up. And Lucille's dad, he had a 1929 Chevrolet, I think. He'd take the back seat out of it. You know, their house was blocks down there. He would go over to Brazil, Indiana, and get blocks in the back of that car and bring them home for that whole upstairs. But anyway, they got that raised up, and he said the bank went broke. And oh, he said, and it wasn't very long, the school quit paying him because they didn't have no money. And he said, but they gave me anticipation warrants. And he said the grocers and the clothing stores, they all accepted those, that someday they maybe would get paid. And he said that's what we lived on. But he said I had quite a time with my roof after, you know, the bank went broke.
Well, you always said he was caught with his roof up. How do you say that?
Yeah, instead of being caught with his pants down, he was caught with his roof up. But I will tell you this, on his visitation, did I tell you about this man that none of us knew came? And he said, I had to come to your dad's funeral because he said what year it was. I and my brother was in high school, and we was going to kill our father because he treated our mother so terrible bad and beat her up. But we had talked to some other kids, and anyway, some of them talked to your dad, to Frank, and he talked to us and got us to come here and stay in this house. All the kids had gone to college. Stay here, and for about, I thought he said 2 weeks, and he said he got us to go to a church down in the country. And anyway, he said, I am sure if it hadn't been for him, we would have killed our dad, and I'd either be in jail or dead. And he said, I'm a doctor, and my brother, he works at the Marathon Oil Company in, where is it over there? Robinson, yeah. But also, I do remember going down there one time with Lucille, and I suppose the kids, and it was in the daytime, and there was this man washing the windows on the porch. Do you remember that porch on the side of the house? No? Well, anyway, there's a porch that went clear across the house, and it was probably 10 feet wide and then clear across. But there was windows all the way around, and then windows and a door too. And this man was painting there, and I didn't know him or nothing. And then I found out he was an alcoholic, and he had lost his job, and his wife had left him. And anyway kicked him out of the home or whatever. And Lucille's dad had him painting there. And then he told him, he said, if you will go to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll go with you. And so he did. And I don't know how many, 2 or 3 months they went. And then this man quit drinking, and he was sober all the rest of his life. So, but Lucille's dad was really something kind of special, I think.
Tell them about the garden where they're...
Oh, yeah. Also, there was a big bouquet of flowers come to Frank's visitation. And they said Birkeland's greenhouse, but that's all it said. It was from nobody's name or nothing. And after the funeral, maybe a month or something, Lucille was down there, because once in a while she bought flowers at Birkeland's and sent them someplace. And so she asked the woman, do you know why Berkman's greenhouse sent this big basket of flowers to Lawrenceville to my dad's visitation? Woman said no, but oh, she said, Mr. Berkman, he's in the back here, I'll get him. And so she got him, and Lucille talked to him and told him, well, he said, I had to do that. When I was in high school, your dad taught ag, and he said, I knew then I wanted to be a florist, but he said, I had no place to grow anything. My parents didn't have any yard or nothing. And he said, your dad gave me a spot behind your garage to raise flowers on. And so that's why I sent this bouquet of flowers to him. He'd become a florist in Effingham.
Cool. Alright, well, you think you want to eat? I think we can stop for now. We may bug you again in a few months or so, but we just want to make sure we had some of the history of the family, you know.
Okay.
Is there anything else today?
Well, let's see.
He tells the story of when you were riding in the ship to Korea where you had to hold on.
Oh, that was coming home.
Okay.
Going
That's-
over to Korea, the water was very peaceful, and I went to San Francisco. But coming home, I come to Seattle, and I left from Pusan over there. And right away after a couple of days, we had terrible storms, I thought. And I think we had 4,500 troops on that ship. And there was times we had to hold ourselves in bed because it rocked so much. But then it got to be better, and then we landed in Seattle. But the dock workers was on strike, so we couldn't unload. But after about 4 or 5 hours, they come back to work, and so we got unloaded then. And then we was at just an army camp that night, and in the middle of the night they woke us up and put us on a train for Chicago, and that's when I come from Chicago then on a bus down to Mattoon.
Is Aunt Kate your oldest?
What?
Was Aunt Kate your oldest, or
No, Lorena.
Lorena?
Yeah.
What did Lorena do?
Okay, she first thing she did when she got out, she was already gone from home when I was born. Soon as she got out of high school, she went to work at Mattoon, keeping house for a rich family. And then I don't know how long it was, she got married. And the Second World War come along. Well, her husband was married before then, before the war come, and he worked in a miller.
Okay, so back to
Okay.
Lorena.
Lorena and Ab Swanigan, can't even think of his name, got married. And anyway, he worked at Miller & Jones shoe store in Mattoon, and Lorena started working there. And then they moved him to a town in Ohio. I forgot the name of the town. But they was just there like a year, and they come back to Mattoon, and he worked for Medigold Dairy at Mattoon, delivering milk with horses and a wagon in Mattoon. And I went up there, and I went with him 2 or 3 times, delivered milk. The horses drove themselves, but it was Western Avenue. It was pretty good, nice part of town where we took the milk to. But then the war started, and he went into the Merchant Marine. And when he come home, I don't know if it was a year later or what it was, but he said he wanted to divorce. He'd met another woman in New York. And so they was divorced, and she never married again. She did go with a man or two. One was Ab Swanigan, or I remember that. But then she helped take care of another. It was a newspaper publisher's son. Him and his wife separated, but they had a son a little bit older than I am, 1 or 2 years. And of course they was well-to-do, you know. and she helped raise him and so forth, and sometimes she would bring me clothes of his that he'd outgrown and so forth, so they's better than anything that my folks could have ever bought me and so on. But then, let's see, it was in 1946 she started working at Myers Brothers store in Mattoon, and it was a men's store then, but little, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 years later, it became a woman's store too, and then she became a buyer for the store, and she went to Chicago, and I know she went to New York 2 or 3 times too to buy clothes and so on. And she worked there then until it sold and it went out to the mall, and Bergner's bought it, and she worked there until she retired. I think she said she worked in the store 34 years or something like that. But Kathleen, she, after her divorce, her husband's name was Herman Hutton. After her divorce, she went to Chicago. And she worked in a clothing store for a little while, but then she got a job in the Palmer House and as a waitress, but it wasn't too long till she got to be manager of the coffee shop. But then, she made more money as a waitress because she said, oh, a lot of tips was $1 for even a cup of coffee. And so she went back to waitressing then, and so she was up there then for several years, and finally her and her husband, they moved down to Charleston and bought, or not bought, but run a restaurant.
So she met Cliff at the Palmer House then?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
over, they had 7 restaurants, Palmer House, and he was over them.
Okay.
And he had a picture of him sitting at a table with, he had a lot to do with the special programs they had honoring people. And what the great ball player from New York City? Oh, Joe DiMaggio. Yeah, he's sitting at a table with him that he was when he was up there at the, but then they come down here to
They had several boats too.
one.
I thought
One or, well, they had one, and then I don't know if they
there
had
was
that and
Kathleen
fixed,
1 and
or
Kathleen 2.
well, one of them they run over something and ruined the bottom of it. I know that, but they lived right close to Lake Michigan. I know that also. But then they come down here to Charleston and they run the restaurant for, I don't know how long it was, College Inn it was called. And then he started being in charge of all newspapers that come into Charleston. And then she worked at and then a little later he worked at a bank in Charleston. He'd done that until he went in the hospital and died. And she worked at a couple of other places. Well, for a little while they run the Benwood Hotel in Mattoon, you know. It was a pretty big hotel as far as that goes, and they run the restaurant in it for a while.
And Uncle Charles, he fought in World War II.
Right.
And so what did Uncle Charles do after school?
He went into the Army right away
Okay.
while he was still in school.
Okay.
And he went to New Guinea, and as I said, he had a nervous breakdown there. And he come back to the States, and he was in the hospital in Danville, Kentucky, not Illinois, Danville, Kentucky. And I remember going down to see him, and I got down there, and I wasn't old enough to enter in, but I did get to go in anyway. I think I was 12 or 13, and you're supposed to be 16 before you went in, because there was a lot of people in there with lots of problems with their minds and so forth. But anyway, he moved up to Danville, Illinois, and I remember the day my folks brought him home, they had to sign some papers. There's a federal courthouse up there at Danville. They had to sign some papers that they would be responsible for Charles. I do remember that. And for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, he got a check, I think $90 a month, and then it quit. But he did pretty well, really, but it not exactly the best.
He lived in town for a while, right?
Yeah, with mother. That's where he lived till he died, or till she died, and then he lived there then for a while before he went to the nursing home.
I
Kate
remember,
Kate lived beside him, you know, after.
yeah, because I remember visiting both of them.
Okay.
We'd go to both of their houses.
Okay.
Then I remember going to Lorena's where was Lorena's at?
Well, she had a duplex last in Mattoon.
That's right. Okay.
But she had bought a house before that out close to the cemetery. But for years and years, why she just had apartments that she rented.
Well, I think that's good for today. We may try again maybe in a few months or so. If we think of other stories, you know what I mean? And if you think of anything, you know, maybe write it down. So
For years, Lorena did not have a car, and so my folks would have to go to Mattoon to get her and bring her home once in a while. And then after I got big enough to drive a car, a lot of times I would take her back to Mattoon. And sometimes I remember I was going with a girl over here that we would take her to Mattoon. But what I do remember is the one place where she was renting, it was upstairs, the stairway was on the outside. She went up there and the door was locked and she didn't have her key. She knowed she left the key inside. So pretty close to the bathroom, there was a small window there, and we raised it, and I climbed up on the railing and I crawled in that window to the bathroom, and then I opened the house up for her.
Well,
But really, considering everything, she did, you know, very well for herself. She started out as a bookkeeper at Meyer's store, and then, as I said, ended up being a buyer and so forth, head of the women's department.
Meyer, is that what you said?
Myers.
Like the Myers that's still around?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. It was Mattoon had one, and now it's called Bergner's now in Mattoon. But it had Springfield, Jacksonville, and I think there was one other place besides Mattoon, but all Myers stores.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
you can tell your other story.
If you wonder why I'm not quite right, when I was 3 years old, Lorena ran over me with a car. And we was in at Grandma Bolt's, and my mother was going to do her washing. She wasn't very well then. And anyway, they didn't have no soap, and so Lorena was going uptown to buy a box of soap to have to put in the wash water. And she went out to the car and backed it out of the lane, and I run out behind her, and she didn't know it, and I run behind the car, and she knocked me down. And anyway, they had to take me to the doctor. I had some damage in my head up here, and the doctor was in town there, and I don't know if he shaved some of my head but anyway, he put a big bandage on it on the top up there, and he told her mother to bring me back in 2 days. And she did, and he took that bandage off, and I cried. And the doctor said, "Shut up, you little devil, you." And mother said she never did like him after that.
Very good. All right, stay right there. I just got to get a few shots here. Okay.
Have you seen any of Dave's commercials?
Huh?
Have you seen any of David's commercials?
No. No.
Maybe he can show you
I'll have
some.
to show you some sometime. Okay, go ahead and smile for us, Grandpa. Okay, you can relax. Will, are you okay with eating pork chops?
Yep.
Okay.
I hope so.
Do you trust a vegetarian cooking your pork?
Well, I don't know about that.
I screwed up the gravy though, warning. I'm gonna pop these in the microwave for a minute.
What's that?
The plates I made out of.